I really believe that one of the biggest barriers to intentionally designing what's next is that we keep it all in our head. We hold on to these questions and these ideas, and we're just sort of bursting at the seams with doubts and stories and all of it. And when you have a place to put your questions down, to put your ideas down, it's like that saying, what gets measured gets managed, right? What gets written down can be dealt with.
Welcome to Take a Beat, a podcast dedicated to those who are wanting to hit pause on the hustle, get clear on your direction, and head toward the life that you envision. Today's episode explores the idea of using innovation tools and mindsets to intentionally design the next stage or step in your career and even your life. This is a passion, and one might even say purpose, for Ashley Jablow, who spent 2 decades working in design, strategy, and innovation, helping places like IDEO and the White House solve big, complex problems. After an unexpected layoff in 2017, Ashley took all the tools and know-how she'd gained in those roles and applied them to her own life to help design her next steps forward. Today, she does the same for others. Ashley's the founder of the Wayfinders Collective and Life Design School, a creative studio guiding individuals through career pivots, burnout recovery, and purpose finding using design thinking and coaching tools. In this episode, Ashley highlights some of those tools and how to apply them to a career transition. Take a listen to hear more, including Ashley's 4-step process for breaking down the process of change to make it less intimidating and more fun. Thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciate you coming on and for, taking the time.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here, Katie. It's always a treat to get to talk about career pivots, reflection, and intentional direction in our lives. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Well, I know that you're a coach and you work specifically with career pivoters and then also I think with burnout recovery and people who are interested in finding purpose-driven work. Your sort of unique spin on it, it sounds like, is your background in design and innovation and using strategy, incorporating that into your coaching. And I'm wondering, maybe to set the stage, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your own background and how that kind of led you to where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, gosh, I mean, it's a big question, and also, to your point about strategy, I wish I'd had a strategy for most of my career. I've been someone who's experimented a lot, and I suppose a unifying theme is that I've always been very ambitious, and I've always been very purpose driven. So those things two together, it's always been about where can I do the most impact on the one hand, have the most impact, but then also like what's the biggest, baddest, coolest job I can find. It's just always been, kind of that unique combination. So I'm very fortunate that a lot of the work I've done has been very cool, I guess you could say, and also I hope has had real impact in the world, and made meaning for certainly myself and for the people I've worked with. My background is originally in the nonprofit sector, so again, very mission driven. I kind of fell into the innovation and design thinking space after going to business school, really learning the ins and outs of like how do we create innovation? How do we, whether that's in the corporate world, better serve our customers and our clients, come up with new products or services, but then certainly in the social impact space and, civic impact, how do we support state and federal governments to provide more human-centered services to the public? So I've worked at really incredible organizations like IDEO and at the White House, and even in the corporate sector have just played a number of different roles, whether that's strategy, consulting, client services. And really, I experimented a lot, and I didn't necessarily see the through line for many, many years. I often felt like, how is this all going to make sense? And it wasn't until I got, I guess, unexpectedly laid off in the summer of 2017, when I started to even just pick my head up and consider, like, is this the path I actually want to be going down? And, if you've ever been laid off, I've realized it's an amazing club of people who have been laid off. I'm very proud to say now. And really it was the gift that many people say it was. But I really, it wasn't until that moment when I picked my head up and considered, like, what else could I do? And when I picked my head up and considered that, I realized that over the course of my career up to that point, I'd been building a toolkit of methods and mindsets, of ways and approaches to innovation that I'd been working with other people to implement and practice. And the question became, well, how might I turn those tools on myself and design my next career pivot? And that's the language I was using. In fact, in that summer, I set out on what I called a 60-day sprint to redesign my career and my life, which was a bit of an ambitious timeline. But really, essentially, it kickstarted my work in the space of bringing those innovation methods and mindsets into career design, into life design. And 8 years later, I have this incredible opportunity now in my business to help people use those same tools, use those same methods and mindsets to innovate in their own careers and lives.
So I guess to kind of circle back to that through line, it sounds like you did find it. It's the innovation, it's the mindsets that you had been developing for others, and then used for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think I'm reminded of a moment when I walked into coaches training for the very first time, and I realized it was so funny. I was a few minutes late to, like, walking into this, windowless ballroom in a hotel in Washington, D.C. And I'm never late. So I was very stressed. And I remember the front of the room instructor coming to greet me. And I could see in the distance, there were all these people standing up and mingling. And the instructor says to me, "Oh, you must be Ashely. We've been waiting for you." And of course, I'm mortified because I'm just like, this is a terrible first impression. But I will never forget, he said to me, "We're just getting to know each other right now. And the prompt for mixing and mingling is, what is your life's purpose?"
Oh, like,
And it's funny because I mean, I now know that's a pretty, like, deep end of the pool to jump into. But at the time, that was like the absolute question that I wanted to sink my teeth into. And I realized walking into that room, that is a question, one of many questions I have been asking forever. So it's almost what you're making me think of, Katie, is yes, the innovation methods and mindsets are the through line in terms of almost the medium through which I express my work, the vehicle. But the question I've always been asking really is about purpose and who do I want to be when I grow up?
can I ask what your answer was in that moment? I mean, that's a pretty deep question for just walking into a ballroom.
Yeah, that's funny. I actually don't remember what I said. I think I might have just been giddy to have found my people. I have since really come to believe that my purpose is to express my own gifts and share them in service of other people sharing their own gifts. I see myself very much as a guide in that way. But at the time, I don't think I could have put words to it.
Just curious what you
Yeah.
thought there. Yeah. Well, to kind of circle back to the idea of using those innovation tools that you started to use for yourself, do you have examples of what that looked like for you as, someone who has not been in the design field, or what that could look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, two things come to mind. One is it's a small but important place to start, and then sort of a bigger picture. How do we bring innovation methods into our career and life design? So, actually, I have right here Sharpie and Post-it pad, right? And designers often get maybe like a bit of a bad rap for, like, oh, we've got to have the Post-its up, right? But But I really believe that actually that is a perfect example of small and meaningful way to start bringing an innovation mindset into what you're doing. So I always go everywhere with a post-it pad and a Sharpie, and they have come out with me at networking coffees as well as happy hours with my husband. We have done design activities, life design activities over beers, over dinner, waiting in car, in the car for the carpool line at school. I really believe that one of the biggest barriers to intentionally designing what's next is that we keep it all in our head. We hold on to these questions and these ideas, and we're just sort of bursting at the seams with doubts and stories and all of it.
Yeah.
And when you have a place to put your questions down, to put your ideas down, it's like that saying, what gets measured gets managed, right? What gets written down can be dealt with. And so I love to invite people to just make sure it doesn't have to be a post-it pad. It could be a pocket notebook. It could be the notes app on your phone, although I do think having something visual and tangible is important. But when you can get it out of your head and onto paper, you can start to do something with it. You can start to review it and see, are there any patterns here? Are there any big questions that I could break into smaller questions? What's the opportunity that I'm seeing here, right? So that's a very small example of just like a day to day. Start carrying some post-its with you and see what you begin to write down. On a bigger scale, when it comes to how do I bring innovation into my career design or my career pivot, innovation at its core really means change.
Okay.
That's what we're talking about. And change is everywhere. We don't love it. We don't love the notion of change, right? It can feel like it's being put upon us a lot, but everything in nature changes. It's just part of the human experience, right? And so the question becomes, well, how can we begin to embrace change? How can we turn towards it, right? And be curious about it and intentional with it. And so there are really 4 steps that everyone, I believe, can practice and apply in service of embracing that change and moving through it intentionally and creatively. And I'm happy to walk through them in more detail, but it's really to discover who you are, discover especially who you are today, not the version of you that picked a major 20 years ago, right? But like, who are you today? As well as to discover what's going on in the world, right? What's current? This conversation so many of us are having today about how do we use AI in a job search, for example, or at work. What's current? So going out and discovering, being curious, opening the aperture of your view to see where are we starting from today. That's the first step. The second is to define, like, what are your priorities? What's your criteria for success? What are your values? Especially for people who find themselves in the middle of their career, or even later in their career and their lives. We're not starting with a clean slate, right? We can't immediately do everything. So being able to say, what's here right now in terms of what do I need for this pivot to be successful, for example. The third step is to imagine. We tend to really shy away from that kind of creative visioning as adults. We think about it as something that like the 5-year-old on the playground gets to do, but I'm too serious for that, or that's too self-indulgent. But imagining, whether that looks like a brainstorm with your Post-it notes, or that looks like writing a vivid vision for your life 5 years from now, or that looks like making a vision board, or dressing like your future self, whatever it might be, right? But spending time imagining what that future you looks like. That's the third step. And then the fourth step is iterate. And what that really means is taking consistent daily incremental action that moves you towards your goal over time. So if you have ever considered, storming into your boss's office and rage quitting on a Tuesday afternoon, you know that that feels really risky and it's not financially probably the best move, let alone like sustainable for our nervous systems. So how do we break really big goals into small action that we can take iteratively and learn along the way? So those are the 4 steps. And again, they're I've never believed it's rocket science. It's something I want everyone to know and practice. And it doesn't just move you towards your goal, but I believe they make you better people. They make us better people, right? So yeah, it's a lot, but it's also very simple.
Well, I like how you break it down and kind of make it a step-by-step process. And what it sounds like is it's really getting at someone's intention. Like, what is your intention for, what you want to be doing now and in the future? And then breaking it down how you can get there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it can feel so overwhelming, especially, again, thinking about change,
Mhm.
right? Whether you are intentionally choosing to change,
Right.
like I'm going to pivot, or you get laid off, for example, and the change is foisted on you, it can feel really scary and really big. And so I'm a really big believer that, yes, just like you said, starting with intention, starting with curiosity, being creative, and then breaking the big change into those bite-sized, doable steps so that you learn along the way, you get smarter, you get yourself unstuck, right? You build momentum and confidence. And ultimately, it's funny, through taking that small action, you actually end up reducing the risk of the big change down the road, right? Because you're getting going and you're learning as you go.
Also sounds like you're building tolerance if you're making smaller incremental changes or just like introducing the idea that there could be a change down the road that when it happens, it won't be as much of a shock to your nervous system.
Yeah. And it's funny because I didn't necessarily think when I started this work that I would be in what I might call like the quote unquote self-trust business. But that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, a person being able to say, I am dreaming of X and I trust myself to be able to go out and achieve it. Right? It gives me goosebumps actually. And I have been on my own self-trust journey as a professional, as a person, as a mother, all the things, right? But that's the path that we're walking on is and why a lot of people often feel stuck, I think, is because this feels scary, not just in a logistical way, but in a like, can I actually handle this? Can I trust myself and this process to actually achieve what I'm hoping to?
Which is where the self-doubt and the talking yourself out of things then comes in. Do you have things that you have found have helped you along that where, whether it's breaking things down or other things to help with the self-trust and not listening to the self-doubt?
Yeah, well, so some of it is, I think, tactical, and some of it is what I might call like self-coaching or self-management, right? So the tactical piece, I really encourage people to lean on these 4 steps, right? What is that expression? Like plan the work and work the plan, right? When you can say, okay, I'm starting with discover, I'm moving into define, now I'm imagining, and now I'm iterating. And you use that as a virtuous cycle to keep going, I can guarantee, like this is your money back guarantee. You will move yourself forward. You will actually practice these behaviors that will reinforce your sense of self-trust. So some of it is committing to the act of getting going, right? And then some of it is also, okay, I'm going to hold myself through this potentially scary moment. And I'll share a story, Katie, because I had a really big unlock, actually in parenting many years ago, that has carried over into owning my own business and moving myself forward professionally. So I have an amazing son. He's almost 13, which is just nuts. And this was probably, gosh, he might have been 6 or 7 at this point. And I remember he was going through a really big dinosaur phase. So we live in Virginia, and there's a natural history museum in North Carolina, and we're maybe like 3 or 4 hours from it. And as a 7-year-old, super adventurous, like, yes, let's get in the car and go. So we're driving to North Carolina, and some people may not think this was a big deal, but for me, it felt like I'm taking my child by myself on an out of state trip that I've never done before. I've never been to this museum. And I found myself, I remember we stopped at a rest stop, and I found myself sort of spinning a bit about like, well, what if I can't find parking? And what if the cafe is closed because we need to find lunch? And like, how do I manage all of this? And the question that popped into my mind was, why wouldn't I trust myself?
Mm.
And it was a really powerful, when you're just sort of divinely given these kinds of questions. And this question of what are the reasons why I wouldn't trust myself in this moment? And what I realized is there were none. There were none. I I was the grown up, right? It's not like my 7-year-old is gonna be able to tell me which parking garage to go to, right? I wasn't with anyone else who might have like a better or more informed opinion about this. No one, it sounds so kind of silly to say, but no one's going to judge me if I take like the longer, slower, more scenic route, right? I don't have to win at this. Like, I trust myself to drive the car to the parking garage. And if the cafe's not open, we'll find something else, right? And if my son melts down, we'll deal with that, right?
Mhm.
But it was a huge unlock for me because I realized I had been kind of waiting for someone else to say, Ashley, you can handle this, or Ashley, here's what you should do, right? And what I realized is in that moment, I was literally the one driving the car, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
I needed to be on my own side.
Yeah.
And so now I offer that question a lot to clients, and it's one I come back to a lot when I'm making a big decision or an investment in my business. Why wouldn't I trust myself? Because actually, I know myself better than anyone else does,
Mhm.
right? So it's learning to dance in those kinds of conversations and inquiries with ourselves,
Yeah.
that I think the real self-trust journey happens.
What's interesting, I think that nervousness can kind of present when we're doing things we've never done before and when the stakes are high, like you have someone else's welfare also at stake. That's when it can feel especially scary. But being able to go back to things that you've done in the past or borrowing from other areas of life can really help then to fortify your resilience almost in this new thing that you're doing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it doesn't happen overnight, unfortunately, right? I wish I could wave my magic wand and just like fuel all of us with 100% self-trust, whatever that
Right.
means, right? But it takes practice. And that's a big reason why I really believe, especially in the this idea of experimenting, of breaking big change into small bite-sized pieces, because you do build your self trust through action, right? And through, as my mom likes to say, through getting on the bus,
Mhm.
right? You can always change your seat later, but you got to get on the bus.
You gotta get on there. So the idea of experimenting, I did want to ask you about that and also using creativity, because even going through your 4-step process, my guess is you're going to go back, forward, and back and redo some things and try some things differently. So just kind of getting your take on experimenting and how that kind of looks like as you're moving through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think one of the places that we often get stuck in a career pivot or any kind of life or career change is we assume it's a thinking problem. Like, we're so good at thinking, right? And I was listening to a past episode, as I said earlier, and the idea of getting out of our thinking and moving into, I think your guest called it an embodied experience. I was like nodding my head in the car, like, yes, you got it. And I would maybe put my own spin on it slightly, that what we're looking to have is a creative experience, and a creative experience being one that engages all of your senses, one that involves making or being out in the world. I often talk about it like we got to get away from our computer and out into the world, right? And experiments, when I heard the word experiment when I was first getting into this work, I immediately thought about the scientific method and like, sixth grade science class. And sure, we can talk about it like that. But really, what we're talking about, I think of it more like a little loop of learning. So, a little loop of learning looks like taking that, again, small action. And I encourage people to think about like, what is the smallest thing I could do, right? What is the fastest thing I could do? The cheapest thing I could do in service of learning. So we don't just experiment just because Ashley says to go fast and break things, right? We experiment because we want to learn something. So a great example is I remember one day my husband came home from work and said, I want to open up a restaurant. And I was like, what are you talking about? You're a data analyst. Like my head could not compute it, right? In the end, what he decided to do was go to culinary school.
Huh?
And that was a great choice for him. It was the right kind of level of experiment, if you will. But I would even, if I could talk to my past self, I would say, well, how could we reduce that even smaller, right? So imagine you want to open up a restaurant. Well, do you like cooking? Right? How about let's pull a cookbook off the shelf and let's try a new recipe,
Yeah.
right? That's an embodied experience. It's a creative experience. We're making something and we're learning,
Mhm.
right? If I like cooking that recipe, well, maybe the next loop, if you will, right? The next sort of experiment cycle might look like signing up for a workshop on a Saturday morning, right? I want to try a new technique in the kitchen, right? Not only in that example, you're practicing something new, you're meeting new people, you're even getting a sense of like, do I like standing on my feet for multiple hours, right? Because that's what we do when we work in a restaurant. So when we can get away from the computer and we can design an experiment that engages our learning and our creative curiosity. Again, it moves us forward, it gets us unstuck, and it builds our self trust because we can say, actually, I'm really into this cooking thing.
Mhm.
Or we can say, actually, I hated it.
Right.
And I can cross that off. And that's really valuable intelligence as well.
Well, and maybe it can give you information about what is it about opening a restaurant that's actually appealing to you? Is it the cooking or is it welcoming guests to eat comforting food?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It may be that you really love being with your community and you love, serving people in some way, but it might not mean that you're meant to become like a James Beard Award winner.
And did your husband, is he a chef now or what did he do with the culinary out of curiosity?
Yeah, so he ended up starting a smoked meat business
Very
of
cool.
all things and ran that for a number of years. He now has his own brewery. So we are fully entrenched in the culinary world, but he has yet to open up the restaurant.
But he's in that world,
He
essentially.
is.
Yeah.
He is. Yeah.
Well, it definitely sounds like both of you are good at designing your lives and careers or walking the talk, essentially.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's interesting because I, again, have always had this through line of like, who do I want to be when I grow up? And it's the thing that I love exploring with other people. And, looking back on both my career story and my husband's, they make a lot of sense in hindsight, right? But even looking at Dan and seeing the path that he's walked It has not been clear cut. It has not been without a lot of strife and confusion. And in fact, one of my values is integrity, and who I am on the inside is who I am on the outside, no matter the situation I find myself in. That's how I define integrity. And one of the reasons why Dan is now in the position of following the things he's passionate about is because he and I needed to have a lot of conversations where I was seeing that I'm, telling the world that you can design a career you love. And yet at home, I'm watching him struggle.
Yeah.
Right. And so we've had to, as a partnership, have a lot of calibration and recalibration conversations so that we can both support one another, to follow our passions, to follow those through lines, and then to be able, for me in particular, to stand in integrity and say, this is a family deal, right? This is not just something that I'm sharing because it sounds good. It's something I really believe in, and we practice. We do.
Do you have advice? Because it does involve an element of risk, being able to follow a passion, being able to pivot, all of these things. And I guess what would your advice be for people who might feel like, I don't want to upset the family, or I don't want to upset, my trajectory or those things, and maybe are a little bit hesitant in that area?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think communication is a really important place to start, right? I'm not a relationship counselor, but I do know that being able to have productive, constructive, honest conversations with your partner is really the foundation. For our relationship, that looks like sitting down weekly to talk kind of more tactically, like what's on my plate, what's on his plate. So we're always aware of big moments, big commitments, all of that. It also looks like roughly quarterly meeting, like we do genuinely have meetings. But once a quarter, kind of checking in on goals and, kind of where are we going. And then we've also gone through a process over the last few years of writing what we call vivid visions.
Okay.
And each of us writing our own for where we see ourselves and our family in the next 5 years, and then sharing them together and seeing where are we aligned and where are we diverging, and not making that a bad thing, but just like, oh, that's interesting. You see us like getting a house on the river. I love that, or like, wow, I'd never considered XYZ. So I think communication is really, really just the underpinning in so much of this.
Yeah. Well, and again, like you said, the visualization aspect seems, the imagining is important as well.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Do you find in your work with clients that that is an area of struggle? Again, like to what you said before, that we're not always encouraged to do so after we turn 13 or whatever age is considered too old for that.
Yeah, and that's such a good question because I think it's a yes and no. Sometimes I actually wonder about if I could ever create like a personality assessment based on discover, define, imagine, and iterate, because they different different personalities, different people resonate with different stages. So discovery and imagine are both very broad and open-ended and divergent kind of spaces to exist in. And there's some people, the visionaries, the curious learners, the people who love to do research, right? Asking really big questions, or, predicting what's going to happen. Folks who feel like immediately that resonance with those spots, if you will, tend to be less comfortable with the discernment and the convergence and the action taking that comes with defining and iterating.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are people who love to put information and things and probably people in really neat, tidy boxes, like me, who love defining, who love list making, right? And then there are other people who love just like, get me out there. I want to take action right now, right? So It's like a choose your own adventure. I often think that again, there is that resonance for different people in different spots. And one of the things to consider if you're feeling stuck is, have you been spending more time in one or two of those either divergent or convergent moments? Because, I mean, just take like discovery. You can research, you can learn, you can be curious. And at a certain point, you're going to be in information overload. You're going to need to start defining and narrowing your focus, right? So you can almost feel the speed of each of those steps, and check in and say, have I been spending a lot of time in one? Is it perhaps time to move on? So yeah, but imagination as a muscle is something that us grown-ups often underutilize for sure.
Do you have any tips or strategies for people who might struggle in that area?
Oh, yeah. I mean, as unfair as it might sound, the first thing that comes to mind is get comfortable with ambiguity,
Okay,
right?
that's fair.
Because and it's so uncomfortable, especially if you're navigating a career pivot and there's urgency to figuring out what you want next or what you need to do next. It can feel like a luxury to be like, "Ooh, what's the future going to hold?" Right? And we need to sit in that space of what if. We need to slow ourselves down and not rush to implementation mode, because I speak from personal experience. I've suffered from what I call buyer's remorse for job seekers, right? You rush to the solution
Yeah.
and you realize the problems from the last place have followed you to this one. So sitting in the open-ended question of what might be, what if, even if you set a timer for 3 minutes and you just grab a pencil and your notebook and you say, what if I could have my dream, right? What would that look like? And then you don't even have to show it to anyone,
Mhm.
right? But you're starting to practice that muscle of curiosity combined with imagination.
So essentially, kind of really allowing yourself to do that and not saying you don't have the time or even maybe cutting yourself off of, I shouldn't want that or I couldn't never have that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of this, a lot of people are talking about being delusional these days and just sort of like allowing yourself whatever dream you wish for. I really have started to believe, whether I call myself delusional or not, if you have a dream, even if it's a quiet one that you've never said out loud to anyone, if it's a dream that you have, it's there in you for a reason, right? And you can choose if you want to nurture that dream. You can choose if you want to tell anybody about that dream. And in fact, coaching is a really beautiful place to practice being honest in a safe space about the dreams that you're holding.
Mhm.
But even your notebook or a voice memo on your phone is an even safer first place to land that dream and say, what might be possible for me if I allowed myself to imagine this future, right? And at the same time, like, let's be honest, Katie, we have to pay our bills,
Mhm.
right? And so I'm not saying that someone should just sit, in a beautiful meadow and dream about their future, and not buy their groceries, right? Like, we have to navigate the real world constraints that we're in. But I believe that there are 60 seconds every
Mhm.
day that you can sit and be curious about an idea that pops into your head or about a wish that you've been holding on to, and just spend a few moments with it.
Mhm.
That's working in service of your imagination and what's possible for you.
Very cool. What about the idea too that you might have a dream and then maybe once you get there, or it may not look exactly the way that you had initially dreamed it to be? What would your take on that be for folks?
Yeah, there's a really interesting sort of like alchemy, I think, of, putting out our dreams and, kind of sharing them and being clear about the path to get there. And then also, like, what just happens,
Yeah.
right? What happens when you share, a great example. In 2020, I started an art project called 100 Days of Designing My Life. As we all experienced in the pandemic, from one moment to the next, nothing made sense, right? The world was turned upside down. And the only thing that seemed to make sense to me was to pick up my paintbrushes. Now, I've never considered myself an artist. Um, like truly, I'm a creative person, but that identity of artist was not something that felt true to me at the time. And yet I still picked up my paintbrushes. And over the course of 2 years, I created 100 watercolors with different design thinking and innovation and coaching, visuals and frameworks and methods and quotes and all of it. And I sat for many years, like 3 or 4 years, with this very public, like, because I was sharing the visuals on social media, all of it. I created this thing. I put myself out there. I had a wish to share these watercolors with people, but I didn't know what form or function that would take. It took until 2024 when I decided to put them into a collection of 4 guided reflection journals. So again, I would think about that as like, I put my wish out there. Okay, I've got these journals and now they're out in the world, right? I I didn't necessarily know the point or the purpose. What's amazing is I've just celebrated the first birthday of these journals,
Yeah.
of them coming out into the world. They're no longer newborns, right? And I could not have anticipated the ways that people would respond to the journals, the doors that would have opened and have opened for me because I put myself out creatively, and imagined, a gift I could offer to the world, right? So it is that dance of like, we can create, we can imagine, we can have wishes, and we should take action towards them. And also, when we take action, new doors open up, new opportunities come to you. People come towards you and say, wow, tell me more about that. Or can you bring this here? Who knows what opportunities will come to you? So it's this really kind of cool co-creative act. But again, gosh, a crash course in dancing and ambiguity, right? Because like, who knows what's going to happen?
And I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but sometimes it can seem like a detour or you get almost like derailed, but it's not. It actually is part of the path to help you get to wherever you're going.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things that's really helped me with that is really starting to truly believe that even if it looks like a mistake, that I learned something. Even if it, on paper or out in the public square, people would say that was a failure. I learned something, and I really, what is that? Like, you eat your own dog food, right? I really ate my own dog food in the moment when I got laid off because I worked in the Obama administration. My title had the word presidential in it, right? You really can't go much higher than that. And then I got laid off, and I needed to find a way to explain and share my story. And I was mortified. How am I ever going to tell people what happened to me? And and again, reframing that as, well, what have I learned through this experience, and really being authentic and owning those lessons. Now, it's much less scary when I contemplate, well, what if this goes wrong? Because I know I will learn something.
Well, I appreciate you sharing the eating your own dog food bit and the humility. I think that can sometimes go along with some experiences, but reframing it now, it sounds like it was a blessing in a sense because it led to a different path, a new path potentially that has served you well.
Yeah. Oh, a path I could never have
There you
anticipated.
go.
Truly,
Yeah.
truly.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story or more of your story and your advice and your steps for helping people to get started on a path to designing maybe the career or the life more so that they would like to head down toward. Do you have any other advice or anything else that's popped into your mind that you think might be helpful for folks as we've kind of been talking?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that comes to mind is to remember that you are not alone, as cliche as that sounds. I have a unique vantage point in that I talk to people every single day, practically, let alone every week, hearing from people who feel stuck and who don't know how to get from where they are today to where they want to go. And equally hearing from people who know that they're ready or even destined for more, right? However you define more, better, different, more impact, more meaning, who feel like they're wasting their time and their potential wherever they are. And so I just would really encourage you to know that there are scores of people out there who feel the same way. And this is, unfortunately can be a very isolating experience to be navigating these kinds of life and career pivots. And so finding your people, whether that's, a group you meet for coffee every couple of weeks to just like commiserate even can be valuable. But then accountability buddies and coaches and mentors and therapists, you don't have to go through this alone. In fact, it really is better together. So
Yeah.
just remember, wherever you are listening to this, there are people all around you who are also navigating these questions and could be great friends and partners for you.
Well, again, thank you so much. And if people want to find out more about you or want to learn more about your tools and your resources, where can they find you?
So I'm at Ashley Jablow on Instagram and LinkedIn, and I'm very active over there. So I would love if people want to connect, come say hi over there. I also have a free workshop that I would love to share with listeners. It's called the Clarity Kit. It's a 30-minute workshop, and in it, it's a video with me, but you can do it on demand. And we walk through reasons why you might be feeling stuck, reasons why you're, facing this or having a desire, I guess I should say, for more clarity. And then I walk you through these 4 steps of life design so you can really see how they work together. And then we actually do an activity together. So, again, that idea of getting your ideas out of your head and onto paper so that by the end of the workshop, you're really clear on the change that you want to make and you're starting to see what that action looks like. So I'd really encourage people to check that out if they're ready to jump in. It's at lifedesignschool.co/kit. It's called the Clarity Kit. So I hope people find it useful.
I hope this episode was helpful in illustrating some different ways of using design and innovation tools and mindsets to help work through change and create the career and life that you want. As an additional note, if you're a career pivoter or entrepreneur struggling to put your value into words, or if you can't quite explain your why, check out takeabeatcoaching.com to learn more about a one-on-one coaching program designed to help you clearly tell your story. Thanks for listening and take care.